Ladies and gentlemen, we are standing in a moment, not just in time, but in truth. 10 jets fell from the sky this week. Not birds, not machines. Symbols of power, of pride, of a nation's will colliding with another's warning. Iran didn't whisper this message. They shouted it through the smoke and the steel, through radar locks and missile trails. And Israel, they heard it loud and clear. But what they do next, that will write the next chapter of this story. But make no mistake, this is not just about Iran, not just about Israel. It's about all of us watching the sky and asking, how close are we to the edge? We're not dealing with two schoolyard kids throwing punches. These are nations with scars, with pride, with blood on their history and fear in their future. They've danced this deadly dance before. You shoot, I strike. You retaliate, I escalate. But somewhere in between, the innocent always pay the highest price. And now the region shakes. Syria feels the tremor. Lebanon tightens its grip. Iraq watches. Palestine prays. And the world holds its breath. People are scared. They hear the jets overhead and wonder, is today the day? Children look to the sky and don't dream of stars anymore. They're counting missiles. They're memorizing shelters. They're learning the language of war instead of peace. But let me tell you something. This is the point where leaders must choose. Not who wins, but who survives. Because wars are not just fought in deserts and skies. They're fought in the hearts of people, in the choices made in quiet rooms, in the courage it takes not to pull the trigger. We are on the brink. Yes, but the brink is a place of decision, not destiny. The future hasn't been written yet. But if it's to be peace, if it's to be hope, if it's to be survival over destruction, then now is the moment to step back, to breathe, to speak louder than the missiles, to remember that humanity must be greater than hate, because in the end, it's not about 10 jets. It's about 10 million lives hanging in the balance. And history. It's watching. Choose wisely. The downing of 10 Israeli jets by Iran represents a dramatic and unprecedented escalation in the long-standing hostility between the two nations. While tensions have simmered for years, largely through proxy conflicts, cyber warfare, and covert operations, a direct military strike of this magnitude is rare and signals a major shift. The act itself is not just about military might. It's a political statement, a message to both regional rivals and global powers. Iran's decision to target Israeli aircraft shows not only its growing confidence, but also a warning that it's willing to cross red lines that were once thought untouchable. For Israel, this loss isn't merely tactical, it's psychological. The Israeli Air Force is widely regarded as one of the most advanced and well-trained in the world. To lose 10 jets in a single confrontation raises serious questions about intelligence failures, defense vulnerabilities, and the overall cost of continued aggression in the region. This isn't just a dent in machinery. It's a blow to pride, prestige, and deterrence. The fallout of such a strike will ripple far beyond military circles and will likely provoke public outrage, governmental pressure, and demands for retaliation. The timing of this event adds another layer of volatility. Regional conditions are already fragile, with multiple conflicts overlapping from Syria to Lebanon, from Gaza to the Red Sea. Any escalation between two major regional players like Iran and Israel immediately threatens the delicate geopolitical balance. Both nations have influence that stretches far beyond their borders. Iran has ties to militias in Iraq, Syria, Lebanon, particularly Hezbollah and Yemen. And Israel, on the other hand, is a key ally of Western powers, especially the United States. A clash of this scale draws concern not just in the Middle East, but in Washington, Moscow, and Beijing. Furthermore, the nature of modern warfare ensures that such an event doesn't stay contained. Cyber systems are probed, satellites are monitored, economic markets react, and diplomatic lines burn red-hot. What began as a military confrontation now has economic, political, and humanitarian consequences. In this context, the downing of the jets becomes more than just a headline. It becomes a catalyst, a spark that, depending on the responses that follow, could either be extinguished by diplomacy or ignite a much larger and more dangerous fire. The global reaction to the downing of 10 Israeli jets by Iran has been immediate, intense, and deeply divided. The involvement of major world powers, namely the United States, Russia, China, and leading European nations, transforms a regional flashpoint into a matter of global concern. For the United States, a staunch ally of Israel, the incident is seen as a direct challenge to its influence in the region. Statements from Washington have emphasized Israel's right to defend itself, with military assets in the region placed on high alert. Behind closed doors, the U.S. is weighing its options, whether to back Israel in a retaliatory move or push for urgent diplomatic de-escalation to avoid a broader war that could entangle American forces and interests. Russia, which maintains strong ties with Iran and a military presence in Syria, finds itself in a delicate position. While it condemns escalation and calls for restraint, it also understands that Iran's actions may be rooted in responses to previous Israeli strikes on Iranian targets in Syria and elsewhere. Moscow's strategy seems to involve playing mediator while protecting its long-term alliances and regional footholds. China, whose economic interests stretch across the Middle East due to energy dependencies and infrastructure investments, has issued a cautious statement urging peace and regional stability. Yet, behind its measured tone lies a growing unease that this conflict could disrupt global oil markets and derail Belt and Road projects in the area. European powers, particularly France, Germany, and the United Kingdom, are scrambling to reassert their relevance in Middle Eastern diplomacy. With memories of the Iran nuclear deal still fresh, they are urging both sides to show restraint, offering to mediate, and warning of irreversible consequences should the situation spiral. Meanwhile, the United Nations Security Council convenes an emergency session, but unity is elusive due to differing geopolitical allegiances. Every major power is balancing its strategic interests, ideological alignments, and domestic political pressures. This creates a tense multipolar response in which no single actor holds enough sway to stop the descent into further violence on their own. What makes this scenario more dangerous is the speed at which narratives spread both on traditional media and social platforms. Propaganda, disinformation, and emotionally charged rhetoric are fueling the fire globally. Diplomacy has a narrow window to succeed. If it fails, this event could mark the start of a broader, more dangerous realignment in global geopolitics. The incident involving Iran shooting down 10 Israeli jets poses a serious threat to regional stability in the Middle East, a region already fraught with layered conflicts, sectarian divides, and fragile alliances. This single military act has the potential to unravel years of delicate balancing among regional actors, each with deeply rooted historical grievances and national security concerns. Iran and Israel are two of the most powerful and ideologically opposed forces in the region, and any open confrontation between them quickly risks drawing in surrounding nations. Countries like Lebanon, Syria, Iraq, and even Jordan could find themselves caught in the crossfire, either directly through military involvement or indirectly through refugee flows, economic disruption, and political destabilization. The potential for a wider conflict increases significantly when factoring in non-state actors and militias aligned with either side. Groups like Hezbollah in Lebanon, heavily backed by Iran, may see this moment as a cue to act, opening up a second front against Israel from the north. Likewise, Iranian-linked militias in Syria and Iraq could escalate hostilities against Israeli or Western targets in those areas. Israel, in response, could strike not just Iran, but also these proxy groups, pulling multiple borders into the scope of retaliation. The resulting chaos would not be limited to state militaries. It would likely ignite sectarian violence, destabilize weak governments, and provide openings for extremist groups to exploit the confusion. On an economic level, the conflict could severely impact oil and gas flows through the Persian Gulf, a lifeline for global energy markets. A wider war would immediately trigger a spike in global oil prices, straining already struggling economies and possibly triggering political unrest in nations far from the conflict zone. Middle Eastern stock exchanges, trade routes, and foreign investments would suffer rapid declines, forcing neighboring countries like Saudi Arabia, the United Arab Emirates, and Egypt to reassess their roles and security postures. Diplomatic relations are also at stake. Normalization agreements between Israel and Arab nations, such as the Abraham Accords, could be jeopardized as public opinion in those countries turns sharply against Israel in the wake of escalating violence. The threat of regional destabilization is not hypothetical. It's imminent if the current trajectory continues. With every hour that passes without de-escalation, the chances of a broader regional war increase, and the already fragile web of alliances, truces, and peace efforts begins to unravel, risking a conflict that could last for years and reshape the Middle East in irreversible ways. The involvement of global powers in response to the Iran-Israel confrontation is not just reactive, it is strategic, deeply calculated, and reflective of broader geopolitical interests. The United States, Israel's closest ally, views any attack on Israeli military assets as a challenge to its own influence and credibility in the Middle East. Washington cannot afford to appear passive in the face of such a bold Iranian move. In response, American military assets in the region are placed on heightened alert, and discussions about reinforcing Israel's air defenses or even participating in joint retaliatory strikes intensify. However, the Biden administration also faces pressure from domestic audiences and global partners to avoid triggering a wider war, especially with American troops still present in parts of Iraq and Syria, making them potential targets if the conflict spreads. Russia, a key player in Middle Eastern diplomacy and military presence, particularly in Syria, finds itself in a complex position. While Moscow maintains strong ties with Tehran and cooperates with Iran through military coordination in Syria, it also has an interest in preserving stability in the region. A full-scale Israel-Iran war would complicate Russia's influence, threaten its military infrastructure in Syria, and possibly force it into diplomatic entanglements it may prefer to avoid. Publicly, Russia calls for restraint and dialogue, while privately assessing how this conflict can be leveraged to weaken American and Israeli positions without direct involvement. China, though less visibly active militarily, is deeply concerned from an economic and strategic standpoint. It relies on oil from the Gulf and has invested heavily in infrastructure projects across the Middle East through its Belt and Road Initiative. An escalating war threatens these investments and undermines its goal of presenting itself as a stabilizing global power. As a result, Beijing pushes for calm through diplomatic channels, calls for respect for international law, and offers to mediate, aiming to position itself as a responsible power while avoiding direct entanglement. Europe's reaction is one of alarm and urgency. The European Union, particularly nations like France and Germany, fear not only a humanitarian disaster, but also the collapse of already strained diplomatic frameworks, such as the Iran nuclear deal. Europe seeks to revive diplomacy, advocating for immediate ceasefires and proposing emergency summits, yet their influence is limited without US cooperation or mutual trust from Tehran. This diverse global response, marked by competing interests and limited coordination, illustrates the complexity of modern conflict, where no event is isolated and every military action becomes a high-stakes geopolitical gamble. The emotional and psychological impact of this incident on civilians across the region is immediate and profound. From Tel Aviv to Tehran and in cities across Lebanon, Syria, Iraq, and Palestine, ordinary people are now living under the shadow of uncertainty, fear, and anxiety. The downing of 10 Israeli jets is not just a military headline. It is a chilling signal that the fragile calm many communities depend on could collapse at any moment. Air raid sirens, emergency drills, and heightened military presence are becoming part of daily life again for people who have already endured years of war, sanctions, or political instability. Families are stocking supplies, keeping children indoors, and checking the news by the hour, wondering when or where the next strike will occur. It's a psychological toll that doesn't just strain individuals, it fractures entire communities. In Israel, where national security has always been paramount, the loss of multiple fighter jets challenges the long-held belief in technological and military superiority. Civilians, while used to rocket warnings and conflict, are now grappling with a new level of vulnerability. The public's faith in their government's ability to defend them is tested, and with that comes pressure on leaders to act decisively, which can lead to swift and potentially rash retaliation. On the other side, Iranian citizens who have suffered economically under sanctions and political isolation are now faced with the terrifying possibility of full-scale war. Many are conflicted. While some see this as a defense of national pride, others fear the consequences of escalation, including further isolation, destruction, and economic collapse. Many of these populations live in areas where proxy militias operate, making them vulnerable to becoming collateral damage. Displaced communities, refugees, and people living in temporary camps face the highest risk, with little to no protection. If the situation worsens, children growing up in these zones are exposed not just to violence, but to the normalization of conflict, shaping a generation that knows war before peace. The psychological scars of living under constant threat cannot be underestimated. When missiles fly, it's not just metal tearing through the air, it's trauma, generational fear, and human lives hanging in the balance. The cost of this conflict is not just measured in military statistics, but in broken homes, interrupted childhoods, and the slow erosion of hope across a region already bearing too many burdens. The confrontation between Iran and Israel, highlighted by the downing of 10 Israeli jets, is not simply a modern event. It is a stark reminder of how history has a way of repeating itself when lessons go unlearned and wounds go unhealed. The Middle East has long been a region haunted by cycles of violence, betrayal, and vengeance. From wars fought over territory to ideological battles shaped by religion and power, each chapter seems to echo the last with new names and new weapons. But the same tragic outcomes, this latest incident reflects how deeply rooted those patterns are and how fragile the hope for lasting peace truly remains. Both Iran and Israel carry decades of distrust, propaganda, and unresolved conflict. Their rivalry has shaped much of the region's tension, fueled by regional alliances, global backers, and proxy wars. Stretching from Lebanon to Yemen, moments of temporary calm have often been shattered by sudden escalations, assassinations, or covert attacks, each one followed by promises of revenge. The act of shooting down military aircraft is not just a strike, it's a declaration, an answer to years of perceived injustice, and a trigger for the next inevitable round of retaliation. It represents how both nations continue to engage in a zero-sum game, where strength is measured by destruction and peace is seen as weakness. As history shows, when emotion overrides diplomacy and pride overshadows pragmatism, the outcome is almost always catastrophic. Past wars in the Middle East have resulted in mass displacement, economic ruin, and irreversible human loss. Despite changes in technology and geopolitics, the fundamental drivers, fear, insecurity, nationalism, and mistrust, still dominate the decisions of those in power. This leads to a familiar path: escalation, miscalculation, and then global intervention after too much blood has already been spilled. The risk now is that this current flashpoint could follow that same path, not because the future is doomed, but because too many leaders are unwilling to break the pattern. The bigger picture is not about jets or borders. It's about a dangerous historical rhythm that keeps replaying itself. Unless someone somewhere in power decides to take a different path, to choose dialogue over domination, this event may become just another chapter in a long history of missed opportunities. The stakes are higher now, and the region cannot afford another war dictated by the ghosts of the past. History is watching, but more importantly, it is warning. So, here we are, not just at a political crossroads, but a moral one. But it's not about metal and machinery. It's about meaning. This moment is more than just a headline. It's a test of leadership, a test of wisdom, and a test of whether humanity can rise above its instinct to destroy what it fears. Iran and Israel may be the main actors on this stage, but the whole world is in the audience, holding its breath. Every choice made from here on will echo through generations. The brink we now stand on is not just about war, it's about whether we still believe in the possibility of peace. Because if we fail to break this cycle now, the cost won't be counted in missiles or jets. It will be counted in futures lost, families shattered, and trust forever broken. This is the moment to choose light over fire. This is the time to step back or fall in. Thank you for walking through this moment with clarity, courage, and open eyes. May wisdom guide those in power, and may peace be more than just a wish. May it be a choice. Stay human, and wherever you are, stay safe. Good luck, and thank you for listening.